I'm training for my first marathon right now, and this week I'm on week 3 of my whole marathon prep. So from day 1 to the very end of hopefully I'm doing the New York City Marathon, which is the projected time. I still got to do the whole lottery and see if my name gets drawn so I can do the thing. If that doesn't work, I'm still gonna run a marathon sometime within that proximity of like that date, like November 3rd time. So roughly I'm about 40 weeks out. So I'm on week 3, and so how many miles am I running? The rule of thumb that many people go by is about that 10% rule. And so we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna talk about how many miles should you increase for your running volume, mileage from week to week. How much should you do? How high, how low? Doing it in a way that's effective and also safe for you, because we're still training, so we want to make sure that we're staying safe, staying in the game, so that we can run and be in it for as long as possible. So I started on week 1, and my running volume on that was 6 miles for that week. And so my weekly frequency right now, that makes the most sense with where I'm at, is about 3 times a week. So 2 miles each for each one, nothing too complicated about that. And so each week I am only increasing my running volume by 10% because I have a base building of running and conditioning for years on end beforehand that, but like a specific period of endurance training for like 3 months prior, and I took about a month and a half off of any type of running. So I knew I wasn't that distant from it, and so I wanted to start on a lower threshold, so about 6 miles. And so each week I am increasing it by 10%, as well as lifting and doing all the other things I'm doing as well. And so from week 1, 6 miles, week 2 was 6.6, which I just did, and now this is week 3. I haven't done any of my runs yet this week, still for 3 weeks. This week is going to be 7.2 miles, and so on and so forth. And so I'm in a 26-week base building period. Of course, as I get further into the program, the mesocycle, I am going to get a little bit more complex, throwing in intervals, long runs, hill sprints, striders, get a lot more nuanced in the variations and how I'm approaching it and how I'm fluctuating the volume a little bit. But before I get to that point, right now I am just getting myself used to it, because I take this me here as like I'm in my infancy. And so if you're someone who's new or just like coming back to running after taking some time off, you're still very much, a term I may use is like infancy or beginning stage, or whatever term you want to use it. But yeah, still in my infancy with this, and so 10% each week makes the most sense for me, objectively and subjectively, because objectively it's only zero point 0.6 miles and then point something like that each week, and subjectively I'm feeling good, and the tissues, my joints and my muscles and everything like that feels good. And so whenever you're making that consideration of how much volume should you increase week to week, definitely make sure that you are thinking about like your exposure to it and also load management. And when I say exposure, I mean you physically, like, are you used to running? Is your body used to running, and mentally, psychologically, are you used to doing that and during that process? Because it is a very big mental endurance game, as well as physical. And then the load management, making sure that you aren't increasing volume, mileage, kilometers too soon, too early, to where your joints, your tendons, your ligaments, your muscles, your body hasn't had time to adapt to it, and you're doing enough volume that you can actually manage and be able to recover from the nutrition, from the sleep, and from basically everything else you do within your life that's going to support it, so that you can continue to progress forward. So those are two big things I would definitely want you to consider when you are trying to think about how excuse me, that you want to consider when you are increasing your weekly volume each week. And then also with those two things of your exposure mentally and physically and the load management, other things I want you to think about is like, okay, do I want to go with a conservative approach? Do I want to go with a moderate approach or an aggressive approach? And that's going to highly depend on your specific situation too. So it's always context dependent. That's why that rule of thumb of like 10%, does it apply to everybody? Not really, because everyone is in their own situation and everyone's different contexts and training status and experience. It all varies. So 10% really just like we're gonna go into it, and so just like everything I really just mentioned, it that 10% or even less maybe matters like hold on. Let me pull it back a little bit here. So I have my notes. So trying to. I'm learning. I'm learning. So when it comes to your like infancy and you're like new to running, I wouldn't worry too much about how specific do you need to get from a weekly increase of like, oh, I need to run 6 miles this week. Next week I got to run 6.6, 7.2, etc., etc. More so, just get used to running itself. Like I said, the exposure and the load management standpoint, the exposure of like you psychologically and mentally like getting yourself through that activation energy, that jump start to go do it, and then you enduring the process itself and learning how your body feels when you're running on the pavement or running on the treadmill, and just how that feels psychologically and mentally and physically. Like, do you want to stop? Can you keep going? The cadence of your breath. Are you breathing in through your nose, your mouth? Because our breathing pattern and also our heart rate are highly correlated. And so if you start hyperventilating and breathing really rapidly, your heart rate's going to go up, which is going to make it the perception of your run feel a lot harder than it is, depending on how much effort you're actually putting into it. And so are you used to running, and also your joints, your knees, the technique, and then also from the clothes of like your shoes, right? You don't want to get any shin splints, making sure that you have running shoes or excuse me. And so really, if you're in your infancy, you just want to get used to the fact that you're going to do the whole running, because your body hasn't had time to adapt to it mentally and also physiologically. Like, your heart rate's going to shoot up regardless. And so the objective, and also with any new habit or behavior change, is that you just want to get going and just get used to it before you start increasing or optimizing or maximizing it anymore. Get used to it. So, and then the same rules applies if you were just getting back from injury. A little bit different, but get just gradually climbing your way up, especially since it's an injury. Maybe definitely place more emphasis on the load management depending on what the injury was. If it was a joint related from the ankle to the knees to the hips, or was it like a tissue related muscular from like say a tendon, a calf, a hamstring, and then also from like a bone perspective of like your shins. Like, is it due to shin splints, due to poor running mechanics, things like that. So definitely want to pay attention to that stuff. And then the next thing you maybe want to think about is like, okay, we're over there, maybe that 10%, maybe it's more so just getting used to it and then like slightly increasing at like 5%, like just adding one extra mile. Like, something I see a lot of new runners do is that you will just run maybe 2 or 3 times each week, and it's just 1 mile at a time, and each week you just add 1 mile, or you run every day but you just do half a mile, and then you do a mile, and then you add another mile, and different approaches like that. Like, there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat. All those are great approaches. And then now the next maybe you want to think about is like, if you were kind of like in the middle of that, of like you're at the next stage but you're not as like aggressively seasoned or anything, maybe that 10% rule can work for you. If you're like a moderate, novice, middle, adolescence age of your running career, then yeah, maybe that 10% just makes sense. It just makes sense to you. Like, it's just perfectly across the field, and that's okay. But however, if you're like seasoned and you have been clocking in lots of miles, kilometers, mileage over the years or even decades, that 10% may not make sense to you. Maybe you got to take smaller jumps, or maybe because you also have a time constraint. Like some runners have their sweet spot. They know about maybe 35 to 40 miles per week. That's like their sweet spot. But again, you may have a full-time job, you may have other responsibilities and commitments that you have to show up for. And so your time window to be able to run is quite, you start to hit that ceiling. And so maybe it's not about adding more volume or more miles, it's because where do you have that? So maybe you just have to get more specific in your training of like different variations of like speed work, of long runs, ease runs, interval work, maybe stuff in the weight room, and then like the run, time of the day, the climate, things like that. Like you have to maybe look at other variables for you to consider, instead of just stacking on more miles. And then it also does swing the pendulum over a little bit more to the overtraining and making sure you don't get injured, because everyone does have their like threshold, like their ceiling, their limit. And if you try to exceed that and you're not recovering, like if you are going to apply more stress, then you need to be able to support that stress from a nutrition, from a recovery, from a stress management, some type of down regulating system of one of the variables, so then you can support that increased stress in whatever that may be of training volume, tissue loading, whatever. So it's definitely a double-sided thing. And so that's something you gotta consider. So coming back here, big picture of like, does the 10% increase to week by week, does that apply to you? It depends. It depends on where you're at and depends on what makes the most sense. Like if you were still, to like take home message here, if you're still in your early days, early years, beginning to moderate phase, just start adding a slight bit each day, each week, or another session, just to get, maybe if you're at the very beginner, just getting used to it. And then when you're in the middle, just doing that 10% may make the most sense. That's what I found in the middle for myself and for just from the research I have done. And maybe if you swing the pendulum on the other side of being more of a seasoned veteran when it comes to running, then maybe you got to be a little more meticulous or detailed in some of those other avenues, and maybe 10% more does not work for you up until a certain threshold. And so those are all things to consider, because if one thing goes up, something must go down to then increase other areas to support that training stimulus. And so with that, just make sure that you are trusting your gut and listening to how your body feels. Your body is your best indicator, and it will tell you if you are doing too much, too soon, or too early. And so definitely listen to that, because the last thing you want to do is to get injured, get hurt, having to go through some type of rehabilitation and, God forbid, surgery, and then you were out for a long time and you just took 10 steps back, and now you have to climb back to a baseline of 0, and it's just it's just a lot. And so trusting your gut, take the time and allow adaptation to happen, and you will eventually get to wherever you want to get, and just be smart with it, and your gut will always be a great compass to guide you towards whatever the North Star is. So that's what I got today. So hope that helped you guys understand how much volume should you, or how much mileage or kilometers should you increase into your running week by week. So like for me right now, like I said earlier, 10% each week makes the most sense right now, and my body is responding quite well alongside the other stressors of my life and my strength training, since I'm still lifting in the gym 4 days a week, to upper body, to lower body. But I understand that once I get into those higher volume thresholds, things are going to have to change in how my lifting is, and my nutrition and my sleep. I will have to get a little more dialed in once I hit those upper thresholds, and then maybe those 10% are going to get a little bit smaller. But as I'm in this big base building season period of 26 weeks out of 40, It's just getting used to and just clocking the miles. So I hope this was helpful, guys. If you have any questions, please feel free to send them my way wherever you are listening to this. If it's on YouTube, throw in the comments. TikTok, throw in the comments. If it's on Spotify or Apple podcast, feel free to shoot me a DM on whatever platform, and I would love to be able to answer your question through one of these episodes, so then someone else can benefit from it as well. Because if you have a question on it, most likely 9 to 10 times someone else will have a question as well. But if you listen this long, much love. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. If you haven't yet, please hit that subscribe button. Give me a rating if you think I've earned it. Spotify takes 2 seconds. Apple Podcast, leave a little note saying whatever your thought may be, whatever I earned. And thank you so much. I will see you guys in the next one, which is tomorrow, because we're doing an episode every single day for 2024. Let's get it. Peace.